Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests and speakers, of course. On behalf of EUROBAT, a very warm welcome to today's webinar titled Sustainable Batteries, a New Regulatory Framework and Market Outlook. My name is Geert Meilemans. I'm Director Communications at EUROBAT, the Association of European Automotive and Industrial Battery Manufacturers. And it's my pleasure to be your host today. So we have today a great lineup of expert speakers from the EU policy side to the industry and to the market analysts. But before going there, I would like to introduce Dr. Marc Zoellner. He is the EUROBAT president and the CEO of Hoppeke Batteries. He will address in his speech some comments looking forward and setting the scene for the rest of the webinar. Mr. Zoellner, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. We will cover the new batteries regulation and the role sustainable batteries play. Driven by the clean energy transition and the need to decarbonize society, demand for batteries is set to grow rapidly in the coming years. Therefore, the European battery manufacturing and supply chain industry is of increasing strategic importance. Each battery technology, lead and lithium, as well as nickel and sodium, has unique features and a strong potential for development. Battery technologies are developed in line with the requirements of the application in mind. No single technology can meet the challenges of the dozens of applications requirements for high power and high density, long life and sustainability of resources. All battery technologies will continue to be essential to the EU's efforts to build a climate neutral economy by 2050. To this end, the European battery industry is committed to investing in innovation and jobs. Now, the European Commission published its proposal for a new batteries regulation. It's the battery industry's belief that this proposal is a real game changer. We believe sustainability and decarbonization must go hand in hand with an ambitious industrial policy for batteries and also a comprehensive and technology-inclusive research and innovation framework. Our position includes the following key points. Number one, numerical targets, for example, on recycled content, carbon footprint, and recovery of materials should be adopted only after the publication of the relevant methodology. That's a no-brainer, I hope. The specificities of each battery technology, and this is the second point, and application should be considered. Thirdly, administrative processes should be streamlined also to facilitate the verification of compliance of national market surveillance authorities. And fourth, hazardous substance management in batteries should follow a risk-based approach and avoid duplication of processes with REACH and occupational health and safety legislation. We have received 500 registrations for today's session, which is truly a great result. We have representatives from the EU Parliament, from the Commission, the Council, and national authorities, other associations, members of the media, NGOs, private companies, and other stakeholders covering the full battery supply chain. My special thanks go to the two members of the European Parliament, Maria Spyraki and Claudia Gamon, for taking over an active role today. Thank you all for your interest in joining today. I wish you a very interesting webinar. Back to you, Gerd.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zoellner, for those opening words. Now it's time to announce our first speaker from the policy side, namely Telma Branco. She is Environment Attaché at the permanent representation of Portugal to the EU. Before announcing Ms. Branco, just to tell you that because of time restraints, unfortunately, we will not have the possibility to put together a Q&A session for her. Thank you very much, and Ms. Branco, the digital stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. I hope that you can hear me well. Let me start by thank you, first of all, EUROBAT, for the invitation to the Portuguese permanent representation on behalf of the Portuguese presidency to take part in this webinar on sustainable batteries. It is my pleasure to be here, although briefly and at a distance with you today. This is indeed a very timely event in the context of the recently presented regulation on batteries and waste batteries, which, as we all know, was presented last December and whose discussion is currently ongoing under the Portuguese presidency. Before I briefly address our plans regarding the discussion of this regulation, let me start by saying just a few words on the main structure of the Portuguese presidency and our priorities for this semester. The motto for our presidency during this first semester of 2021 is time to deliver for a green, fair, and digital recovery. And under this motto, we have identified 5 key priorities: a resilient, social, green, digital, and global Europe. Portugal takes the presidency at a key time for the implementation of the European Green Deal, and we have set as one of our main goals to mobilize the member states behind this strategic document for Europe. We have set ourselves with the aim to promoting an innovative and resilient carbon neutral development model, which will ensure that climate policy and the goal for carbon neutrality are fully integrated into the various sectoral policies. We will promote the objectives of decarbonization, energy efficiency, the circular economy, sustainable mobility, and the conservation and restoration of ecosystems and biodiversity. As you can see, the proposed regulation on batteries and waste batteries is a perfect reflection of the time in which Portugal takes the presidency and the priorities that I just mentioned. Due to its innovative, comprehensive, and full life cycle approach, the proposal for batteries regulation contains in itself all of these dimensions, which are at the core of the European Green Deal and also of the Portuguese presidency. This is indeed the first legislative proposal to be presented in follow-up to the Circular Economy Action Plan, and the Portuguese presidency will have the responsibility and also the privilege to start this negotiation, and we are committed to advance as much as possible in its discussion. We will do so, of course, aware of the importance of this piece of legislation for sustainable mobility and climate neutrality objectives in Europe, as well as regarding its relevance for the European industry and EU strategic autonomy, and also for increasing sustainability across the batteries value chain. As we all know, this is quite a technically complex proposal and also one with quite a broad scope. And after its adoption by the Commission last December, the negotiations have started at the Council. Based on the initial discussions, the Presidency will promote a policy debate on this proposal on the informal video conference meeting of Environment Ministers that will take place next week on March 18. We hope this debate will provide initial political guidance on some of the main issues identified so far, which can then be useful for the continuation of the negotiation. As I mentioned, the Portuguese presidency is committed to advancing as much as possible in this file towards the adoption of a general approach of the Council, but we do still have an intense and detailed work ahead of us. And we will therefore need to further assess the position where we will be able to be in by June, by the end of the Portuguese presidency, before we then pass on the responsibility of the presidency to our Slovenian colleagues. I thank you once again. I thank once again to EUROBAT for the invitation to the Portuguese Presidency for this webinar. I wish you a continuation of a successful and fruitful discussion, and we look forward to receiving also the results of your webinar here today. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Ms. Branco, for those insights, and also thank you for taking the time this morning. If you can, please feel free to stay on. If not, thank you again, and hope to see you at the next occasion. Now, it's time to announce actually our third speaker of the day. It is Christophe Pillot. He is the CEO of Avicenne Energy, which is a specialized consultancy in the fields of energy and battery. He will present today the key outcome of a study reviewing the European battery market, both in terms of demand and supply for the next decade. And he will set this in a global context. Those key takeaways will also be used later on in the panel discussion. Actually, the panel discussion and the Q&A with Christophe Pillot will be managed by Alphonse Westgeest, who is the General Manager at EUROBAT. Christophe, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Gerd, for the introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today, even in virtual. Well, as mentioned, this presentation is a synthetic presentation on a more important report we made for EUROBAT last year. So the presentation today will have first we detail the objective and the scope of this report, then the global battery market, the battery demand in Europe, both for automotive industry and industrial battery demand, and then the battery demand and supply in Europe from 2015 to 2030, and then some conclusions. So the objective for the next slide, the objective and the scope of, no, please, next slide again. Could you go on the next slide? Okay, so the global battery market for automotive, then industrial, stationary, and motive power batteries. On the next slide, you can see on the left side the market in gigawatt hour or megawatt hour, and on the right side the market in $1 billion. You can see that two most important technologies: lead-based batteries and lithium-ion batteries. Roughly in 2020, the demand is about 650 gigawatt hour, 410 gigawatt hour for lead-based batteries, and 230 gigawatt hour for lithium-ion batteries. Then this market will grow for sure to reach roughly 1.4 terawatt hour in 2030, and that's quite a conservative scenario. What does that mean in value? In value, the market will increase from roughly $90 billion in 2020 to more than $150 billion in 2030. Again, lead-based battery and lithium-ion battery will be the two most important technology and chemistries, but nickel metal hydride, nickel cadmium, sodium batteries or zinc air batteries will still be there as well for niche market. On next slide, we focus on the European market and European supply. On the left side, that's the lead batteries. Roughly, the market is about 400 gigawatt hour in 2020, with a small growth until 2025. Roughly, Europe accounts for 20% of the worldwide market. On the right side, the lithium-ion batteries, you can see that in 2017, or even 2019, 2020, the market is really concentrated in Asia. First, China, but also Japan, Korea. And you can see that Europe or either US are very, very, very small, small production place for lithium-ion batteries. This will change mostly because most of the OEM, the car manufacturers, want to have their suppliers next to them. So European car manufacturers ask their battery suppliers to be next to them. So the production in Europe or also in US will increase drastically in the next couple of years to reach in Europe at least 200 gigawatt hour in 2025, sorry. On next slide, we go to see the supply and the demand from 2015 to 2030. So on the first takeaway is about the chemistries. And you can see that, all the first on lead battery market will increase in the future. Even if the increase is not so important, the lead acid battery will still be there mostly for starter, light and ignition batteries, 12-volt batteries, but also for e-bike market, for motive application, forklift, for example, for stationary application, for backup batteries, telecom application, UPS, and some other application. In megawatt hour, the European demand is about 70 gigawatt hour in 2020 and will reach roughly 80 gigawatt hour in 2030. So a growth even for lead acid batteries. The production in Europe is enough to supply all the European market because roughly 90 gigawatt hour in 2020. Then on next slide, you have the lithium-ion batteries. The lithium-ion batteries for sure is driven by electric vehicle market in green. The electric vehicle market will increase drastically. We built two scenarios. In the two scenarios, I should say, are conservative. In the first scenario, we estimate that the EV market penetration will be about 15% in 2030, which is really conservative. And in the realistic scenario or optimistic scenario, we estimate that the EV demand will achieve 30% in 2030. With those scenarios, the market will reach $45 billion in 2030, with a total demand of 400 gigawatt hour in Europe in 2030. With all the projects announced by battery manufacturers, both Asiatic manufacturers coming from Korea, coming from China, but also European projects like ACC in France or Nordvolt or some other project, the production capacity should be enough to supply all the electric vehicle market by 2030. Today, it's not the case, but we estimate that by 2023, 2024, it will be the case. On next slide, to summarize by application, we can see that there's really two types of application for automotive. The 12-volt battery, starter, light, and ignition batteries, or auxiliary batteries, and the traction batteries. For the 12-volt batteries, in all kinds of vehicles, conventional, ICE and micro-hybrid, mild hybrid, full hybrid, PHEV, EV, all those vehicles need a 12-volt auxiliary battery, and this battery is lead batteries mostly. There are some announcements that some players maybe will switch, but it's really a small portion of the market. Then for traction market, where we need much more energy density, we need lithium ion. And all the market now is powered by lithium ion, except one exception for hybrid vehicle, which could be powered by nickel metal hydride sometime. On the next slide, you have the synthesis for industrial battery. For industrial battery, we have to segment by application. First, UPS or backup batteries. Today, it's really the lead battery that dominate this market, and we estimate that even in 2030, lead battery will dominate this market thanks to low price compared to lithium ion. For telecom business, telecom base station, today, again, lead batteries is really dominant, and we think that in the future, and we forecast that in the future, the lead-based battery will still be dominant in this market, again, thanks to the lower price. Lithium ion will penetrate this market only in a country where the weather is very hot, because the lead-based battery lifetime will be too small. So the total cost of ownership with lithium ion could be lower in really special country, or especially with hot weather. For energy storage system, again, most of the market today is based on lithium ion battery this time. And this will remain true for the future. Lithium-ion battery is really dominant on this market today and for the future. Then the motive market. Motive market is mostly the forklift, for instance, or automatic handling equipment. Today, the lead-acid batteries is really dominant. But we saw a switch from lead acid to lithium ion, because even if the lead acid batteries cost is lower, in most of the case now, when you have 24 hours usage of your forklift or your automatic handling equipment, and you have to switch your lead batteries 2 or 3 times a day, then you save time having a lithium-ion batteries, and at the end of the day, the total cost of ownership with lithium-ion is lower than with lead acid. That's confirmed by a lot of interviews we've made with forklift manufacturers and forklift users, and in the future, we estimate that the forklift market will switch from lead-acid batteries to lithium-ion battery. But lead acid will keep a market share for not intensive usage of forklift. On next slide, you have the European full demand and supply for all kind of batteries. All kind of battery will still be there in 2030, but you can see that nickel cadmium and nickel metal hydride batteries will be really small market for niche application, and the market will be really driven by both lead-based batteries and lithium-ion batteries. Again, the production capacity in Europe should be sufficient in 2030 to cover all the European demand. So the conclusion on the next slide, the key takeaways for the European battery production. First, the European battery industry produce all chemistries and will meet demand thanks to lead-based and lithium-ion batteries, comprising more than 90% of the total European battery by 2030. Nickel cadmium, nickel metal hydride, but also other chemistry like sodium ion or zinc air and some other batteries will survive, but for niche market, and the volume will be very small compared to lithium ion and lead acid batteries. Second point, the lead acid batteries. Lead acid batteries will still be there in 2030, and we need this technology to power 12-volt automotive batteries, to power UPS, to power base station for telecom. So lead acid batteries will still be there by 2030. And with a small growth, but a growth. Then third point, the lithium-ion battery, huge growth thanks to electric vehicle demand. So really, this market is driven by electric vehicle. The electric vehicle demand already represent 65% of the demand of lithium-ion battery today, and the EV demand will increase to 85% of the total lithium-ion demand by 2030. On next slide, to summarize, both lithium-ion and lead-based batteries will be the two mainstream technologies by 2030 to serve different applications. The lead will focus mostly for 12-volt automotive, UPS, backup, telecom application. And lithium-ion will focus mostly for EV, but also, of course, power electronics and so on. The European lead-based battery industry will maintain strong position and will be able to meet projected growth, but ongoing investment in research and development and production enhancement are required. Then the European lithium-ion battery industry is set to serve growing demand as of 2023-2024. Well, with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I will be pleased to answer your question in the next Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christophe. Mr. Pillot gave a good overview of what to expect in the markets in 2030. For those who joined a little later, there is a Q&A function. Chat is not enabled, but there is a Q&A function, and we have actually some questions coming in for Mr. Pillot. So I will try to make a good selection. The first question is about key takeaways for the lithium-ion market and capacity building. So it seems that both the market and the capacity of manufacturing seem to grow at the same speed for lithium-ion. Are there any economies of scale or technological breakthroughs expected that will see a shift between markets and capacity in Europe?
Well, very good question. So that's true that both market and market demand and capacity are growing roughly at the same rate, so which is a good thing. Do we expect economy of scale? Of course. First, economy of scale thanks to learning curve. At the beginning, even Asian suppliers have really a poor process yield, maybe 30% scrap in the production and in the plant, even for LG or Samsung when they arrive in Europe. So the first economy of scale, then the first will be this. Then for sure, when we'll achieve several gigawatt hour for a plant, the price and the cost of the cell will decrease, which is a good thing for the Europe. Then in technology, some breakthrough. We do not expect any revolution in terms of chemistry for lithium-ion batteries, but some evolution. We'll add more silicon in the anode, we'll add more nickel in the cathode, and so on, but no really revolution for the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years. Then we can have some new technology appear. A lot of people are working on solid-state batteries, for instance. So solid-state batteries could be also a solution, but we don't see solid-state for the car manufacturing and car companies before 2030.
Christophe, when you consider availability of raw materials, if you can speak for both or all battery technologies, when you think about circularity and sustainability, so when lead batteries remain a very solid market and lithium is growing, how do you see the projection for availability of those technologies in terms of raw material availability? Do you have any insights or projections for those two technologies?
Yes, sure. So for lead acid, I would say it's really an historical chemistry, and the recycling rate is really, really high. I don't know exactly how much, but probably between 95% or 99% of the lead is recycling. So we don't see any issue on the availability of raw material for the lead acid battery. Then for lithium ion, as you know, there are several metals needed. Lithium first, but it's not the most important. Nickel, cobalt, copper, and so on. Well, in Europe, we don't have so much lithium. We don't have so many cobalts. We don't have so many graphite as well. So it's an issue. We should import those material from, for example, for the cobalt, or South America for the lithium, and so on. Then we have to transform this material to have cobalt sulfate, nickel sulfate at the battery grade. And here we have to invest in Europe to do that. Then the recycling will be very, very important for the future, even for lithium-ion battery. And already a lot of work has been done for recycling in the lithium-ion battery field. And lithium, nickel, cobalt will be recovered at very, very high rates in the future. And the recycling is not only for 10 years from now, even for lithium-ion, because as I told you, the scrap are really high at the beginning of the production. So we need recycling almost now, even for lithium-ion battery.
Thank you, Christophe. And that will conclude the Q&A. I have received some other questions, but they cover also, for example, the importance of light electric vehicles, as well as the availability of new mining opportunities in Europe, where some countries are indeed pushing forward. So in other words, to have more local production of raw materials as needed. But you correctly made the assumption that for lead batteries, it's basically a closed loop, but we still need some new materials coming in, given the market size. And for lithium, there will be an expected increase of the recycling and circularity. So with that, thank you again, Christophe, for your highlights here. And with that, I would like to move to the next session, which is about policy direction as well as the industrial view for the battery industry. We have 5 panelists, and to start with, we will have a 2-minute statement by each of the 5 panelists. And I will introduce them one by one, as you will see them coming in on the screen. First of all, I would like to ask Ms. Maria Spyraki, who is a member of the European Parliament for the EPP group from Greece, and also a key player in the research and other committees of the Parliament. And we would like her to give the first view from the policy side before we move to the other MEP for her 2-minute statement. Ms. Spyraki, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me, and it is my pleasure to participate in this high-profile event and exchanging of views. Before I start, I would like to ask you to forward to my mail the report of Mr. Pillot. It's very interesting, and one of the issues that I am concerning on is on how can we take the concerns of the industry on board by doing our job, which is co-legislator. And by having this, I would like to express my pleasure for the participation of Mrs. Gamon as well. We are very close, we work together in various reports, and I think that we are in a very good situation now for the panel. And by saying this, I would like to say that this topic is more interdependent than one would suspect, because it includes both industrial aspects with regards to the usage scopes of batteries and market and environmental aspects. And in this regard, as CPP Shadow Rapporteur on behalf of the ITRE Committee on the file, I would like to share some initial thoughts through the discussion. The first one is that it is important to have a balance between the ambition and realism regarding the regulation to ensure that we match increasing demands for batteries with raw material supplies, especially bearing in mind the vital priority that we have already set in the Parliament, which is the strategic autonomy of the EU. In this regard, I strongly support the Commission's proposal for mandatory requirements for all batteries placed in the European market, and I think it is a key. We have to insist on use of responsible sources, and it is also important to focus on restricted use of hazardous substances. Allow me to be very sensitive on this topic due to my capacity as one of the co-authors of the motion for a resolution for chemical strategy for sustainability. It is also important to focus on minimum content of recycled materials and carbon footprint in order to avoid unfair competition when it comes to third countries. It is also important, according to my opinion, for batteries production in Europe to adopt a full life cycle approach and focus also on repurposing and increasing mandatory targets for reuse and recycled batteries. In this regard, I fully support the establishment of battery passport, which will facilitate the market, which will interlink the data that we have available, and should play a key role by increasing transparency of the battery market and also by increasing traceability of large batteries through their life cycle. It is important to understand that we have to reuse and to repurpose large batteries also. We have to develop new innovative products, and in this regard, I think that it is important to have the adequate funding. We have to meet the targets of 2030 with batteries, and battery can provide many solutions with respect to implementation of the provision of the Circular Economy Action Plan 2. It is crucial for me also to have a solid legislative framework for providing stability and predictability to the market in order to facilitate the reduction of all ecological and social risks along the entire battery value chain and maximizing the sustainability and the contribution of the batteries to the green transition. By concluding, I would like to say that we must maintain the European global leadership regarding green technologies, which can prove to be a serious competitive advantage in the post-COVID era under a carefully crafted regulatory framework. I strongly believe that we need a robust and viable European industry to ensure the transition to a climate-neutral economy and reap the global benefits. Thank you very much once again for having me in this very interesting panel.
Thank you, Ms. Spyraki, and we will also give Ms. Gamon an extra minute, so a 3-minute slot, as the rules in Parliament would almost say equal. We have Ms. Claudia Gamon here from the Renew Group, original Austrian, and also a key player in some of the energy-related files. Ms. Gamon, the floor is yours now.
Yeah, hello. I want to thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak today. I want to thank EUROBAT for organizing this. I think it's a very good, it's a great chance to really talk about what lies ahead when it comes to the batteries legislation. And I want to thank my colleague Maria Spyraki for her very nice words. We really have indeed worked together very well. And I think this is a very important base in the Parliament to really find a strong position on this very important topic. As you've said, I'm a member of the Renew Europe group, and I work on all the 3 committees that are important for the new batteries regulation, on the ITRE, the ENVI, and the IMCO committee. And I'm a shadow rapporteur in the IMCO committee, and I was also the rapporteur for the initiative report on energy storage that we did in the ITRE committee together with Maria Spyraki. This is a very important week because we're also talking about the first timetable for the rapporteurs in the IMCO committee that has been proposed, and because the Conference of Committee Chairs eventually decided about the joint custody of the regulation between the ENVI committee and the IMCO committee. And I think it really represents the way that we talk about batteries right now and what will be important for the regulation. I think it will be an interesting challenge to coordinate the different views on this, but I'm really excited to start working on this file. Because, as I have said before, that I worked as a rapporteur on the energy storage report, that for me it really opened up a world to see what a very important role batteries play in the energy transition, and that we really don't talk about this enough, what a crucial element they will be, and how important it is to really give this industry a chance to develop in Europe, and to give it a chance to develop really its own place in the world, where we focus on sustainable battery production in the European Union. We have addressed a couple of major challenges in the storage report, and I'm really happy to see that the Commission has already taken aboard some of them in the report. For example, focusing on a sustainable European battery production by looking at the CO2 life cycle footprint of batteries. Because I'm very sure of the fact that this will actually show the competitive advantage that batteries have from that standpoint. It's about introducing recycling provisions for battery types, also such as lithium iron, to keep valuable raw materials in the European value chain and giving this industry also a chance to develop. It's about setting standards for due diligence and repurposing second life batteries. So to close this up, I'm really excited also to listen today to the experts in this field and to try and really bring this all together to work on this regulation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ms. Gamon. Very clear and underlining the importance, together with Ms. Spyraki, that this proposal for the battery regulation is the first one really concretely out of the Green Deal and the recovery, in fact, and how it can play a role in many different applications. As Dr. Zoellner at the outset said, batteries are used in many, many different applications. That bridges actually to some views by Mr. Karsten Kurz, who is the Environmental Health and Safety Cluster Leader at EUROBAT, as well as the Director Environmental Affairs Europe with Exide Technologies. Karsten, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alphonse. As a EUROBAT cluster leader, it's one of my tasks to facilitate the efforts building opinion on environmental legislation such as REACH, End-of-Life Vehicle Directive, and battery regulation. As an employee of Exide Technologies, I'm helping to prepare my company for the future, means enhancing our sustainability footprint to a next level. Backbone of Exide Technologies is lead-based batteries for automotive and industrial application, but we also offer a growing portfolio of lithium-based systems. As we have just heard from Christophe Pillot, the future looks bright for batteries. And one of my favorite statements comes from the slide on automotive and EV traction batteries. Again, we have learned about the importance having both lead and lithium-based batteries available to make e-mobility happen. The energy storage will be the key to achieve the targets of the European Green Deal. And luckily, both of you, Mrs. Spyraki and Mrs. Gamon, have already proven your expertise on that. The key element for the future of batteries will, as we all know, the upcoming battery regulation. It's an enormous piece of legislation and an opportunity to prepare our industry, to prepare our Europe for the future. But as much as we appreciate and like the Commission proposal, we see some key shortcomings. The battery industry really has quite some experience, for instance, with REACH. Managing hazardous substances is a key task for our industry. We may not admire all the details of the REACH regulation, but without doubt, the REACH processes and the work of ECHA provide a robust framework on how to deal with hazardous substances. So why on earth is the Commission proposing a parallel REACH-like process? Another of our concern is recycled content. My company, as well as other EUROBAT members, are integrated battery manufacturers. It means that we operate sites to manufacture batteries and also operate sites that recycle spent batteries. So we well agree on having appropriate target levels for the recycling efficiency, material recovery. But the concept of a minimum recycled content in a product, irrespective of whether it's a battery or not, has some obvious shortcomings, especially when we look at growing markets. And my 2 minutes are about to disappear, so we may have the opportunity to discuss this during the course of this morning. So, thank you, Alphonse.
So, Mr. de Metz, if you can give your 2-minute statement. You are leader in EUROBAT of the Batteries Regulation Task Force, and you're Corporate Government and Environmental Affairs Director at Saft Batteries. Mr. de Metz, let's take you first in your 2-minute statement.
Thank you, Alphonse. Can you hear me? I need to check this.
Yes, please. You are.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for giving me 2 minutes. A couple of words about SAFT, which is quite unknown by the general public. We are a world leader in the manufacture and the design and manufacture of high-performance industrial batteries that go into aircraft, high-speed trains, underground systems, rockets, electricity distribution, metering, and many other high-performance applications of batteries. We've been very active lately on the front of the batteries initiative pushed by the Commission. Some of you may know that SAFT, with PSA, the car company PSA, which recently merged with Fiat Chrysler, creating Stellantis, we have jointly founded a joint venture called Automotive Cells Company with a view to establish in Europe a large manufacturing footprint for automotive traction batteries, following the initiative of the European Commission under the European Battery Alliance, or the Battery Airbus. I would like to share with you that we are very supportive of the new proposed regulation by the Commission, and essentially on 2 key grounds. The first ground is that we believe that it really creates a very sound foundation for the development of a new industry in a very sustainable way, which we absolutely need for a new industry which is bound to grow very significantly over the next few years. And the second reason is that we believe it creates opportunities for European industry to differentiate itself on the world stage by promoting our values, our ways to do business, our ways to manufacture, and our ways to deal with our workers, our employees, and the people that work with us. So for those 2 reasons, we are very supportive of this initiative from the Commission. I would like to say 2 quick words on 2 elements of this proposed regulation. One about the due diligence, supply chain due diligence requirement. We very much support this due diligence supply chain requirement, and actually we would like it to be expanded over and beyond the material supply chain, and we would like it to cover the whole supply chain, irrelevant of the nature of the supply, whether it's raw materials, manufactured parts, software, any sort of supply that we may purchase as a battery manufacturer. So we think the supply chain should not be limited. And one second quick comment with regards to CO2 footprint, the CO2 footprint calculation. We believe this is a key tool to demonstrate indeed that mobility batteries and electrical vehicles do bring a lot when it comes to emissions reductions in transportation. However, we are a little concerned that this requirement would be rushed through to all sorts of batteries when the methodologies have not yet been established to properly track that CO2 footprint across all different chemistries and all different uses. So we're asking for caution here, start with electric vehicle batteries, and possibly, depending on the results, if the methodologies are solid, move on to other segments. I'll stop here for this quick introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. de Metz, for your views, and this brings me to understand more about your particular insights as leader of the task force for EUROBAT, covering all the different technologies and challenges ahead, but also the opportunities, as we heard from Mr. Pillot at the start. I'm checking just with the technology, but Mr. Dings is not on voice yet. While we are working on that, as promised, I would like to start with some of the questions that we have received for the members of the European Parliament. The first one for Mrs. Spyraki is about carbon footprint and what was mentioned earlier about methodologies. So, Ms. Spyraki, when you mentioned the importance of carbon footprint and life cycle, What type of methodologies would you refer to, or would you come back later on that in more detail as a parliamentarian? Or do you have some views on carbon footprint and methodologies?
I think that the methodology is a competence of the expert. Our opinion and our competence is on how to streamline the production of batteries for a full life cycle in the European Union, and also to create a level playing field that it will facilitate that we have the same opportunities for the batteries that they are producing in Europe and the batteries that they are importing in Europe. This is our responsibility, and this is our competence. Methodology is something that will be proposed by the expert. Our competence is to create a legislative framework that will facilitate the leading industry in order to adapt circular economy principle, and also in order to adapt the demand that we are now have in the European Union, and it will be increased according to Mr. Pillot's approach. I'm very much enthusiastic on the reaction of the industry, especially when it comes to the adoption of the due diligence, and also to the adoption of the battery passport, and to the adoption of the footprint approach. Because it is important to understand that we are now working in a very different level in order to address our targets for 2030 and also for 2050, and by working as pioneers and leadership in a global era. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Spyraki, for that answer. And I would like to ask a follow-up question to Mrs. Gamon on both this topic, but also actually a topic that is close to our heart, is how the Parliament is looking at its own calendar, given that member states have already started studying the regulation, the proposed regulation, what the potential timeline could be in 2021, 2022, if you have any information on that. But first, maybe a reaction to the question about carbon footprint and recycling. Mrs. Gamon?
Well, I mean, on a general level, I very much agree with my colleague that this is a technical question and should be answered by experts. I just have a couple of things that are important to me on what a CO2 footprint analysis should cover. And I do believe that it should cover real emissions and not the average emissions that would make it incomparable also to other technologies. And it should generally be a methodology that we can use to compare technologies to one another. I think that is what's important, because we want to show what will actually be feasible in the energy transition and what will bring us to our goal. And for that, it's important to use real emissions values. When it comes to the timetable, I believe that the timetable that I have seen is a well, it looks like that the Parliament wants to take its time. I believe that we could do it a little bit quicker, but I mean, that is also up to the rapporteur to decide. But in general, I don't think that I can tell you anything more than that. I mean, that will be public information then anyway.
Thank you, Ms. Gamon. And yes, the timetable is indeed important. We want a proper and good discussion, so that Parliament should take its time to go through. That's much appreciated as representatives of the people and political views in Europe. I would like to ask Mr. de Metz to maybe respond quickly on the point on the methodology for carbon footprint. You made a remark, but maybe you would like to wrap up that question as well. And then we move to Mr. Jos Dings.
Yeah, quick comment on methodology. We have a little acronym that we'd like to share with you. It's EUROBAT. We would like this methodology to be understandable. U like understandable, S like standardized, A like accurate, D like differentiating, A like auditable, and C as comprehensive. I think these are the 6 criteria that we would like to see implemented when the methodology is built. That's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe also that given the fact that there's, besides the regulation proposal, there would be many different secondary legislation pieces or delegated acts and implementing acts. And one of our key asks as EUROBAT is to make sure that the methodology is known, as was mentioned, before you can actually provide targets. I would like to check in on Mr. Jos Dings and see if he can now bring on his 2-minute statement, besides the video also with sound. Mr. Dings?
Good morning, can you hear me all now?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
Okay. It's an honor to be here. I'll try to be brief in 2 minutes. As Tesla, we are fully committed to a sustainable and closed loop supply chain of batteries, and we're working very hard towards that objective. We are Europeanizing our activities very quickly. Behind me, if everything works, you see the Gigafactory Berlin-Brandenburg that is currently under construction, and that we also hope will be soon expanded with a very sizable battery facility. The exciting news is that we will develop a fully homegrown new battery in this facility. The battery is pretty special. It's much bigger than the ones we currently use. We fully make it ourselves, and we use a completely new production process without any solvents and without any ovens, which are the biggest energy user in battery production. So we cut out multiple dozens of % of energy use during battery production, and as such, a world first about to happen, hopefully by the end of this year. On the regulation, we have some various views on it. There's good and less good and pretty challenging elements in it. We like the fact that the rules are going to be much more harmonized than is currently the case. We like that a separate category for EV batteries is being generated. We like a much better transfer of responsibilities to when batteries go into second life. And we also welcome the material recovery targets for recycling, which do ensure that recycling in Europe is a good environmental quality. The things we less welcome is that the access to battery information is pretty much unqualified in the current proposal. Virtually anybody could receive any sort of information on batteries under current language. We think that should be restricted both in actors and both in the type of information. On the carbon footprint, lots of open questions to the point that we don't even know whether the operations we are currently starting will fit in a future carbon standard or not. It introduces quite a significant uncertainty. And yes, we fully agree that hazardous substance restrictions should be regulated under REACH. Things that worry us greatly is the obligations for recycled content. This seems to be born out of a fear that not all batteries will be recycled. I think this fear is unjustified. The loop is already closed and will remain closed in years to come. But moreover, the sheer magnitude of the proposal, and especially the sheer amount of amending proposals that are still to come, over 30, both delegated acts and clarifying amendments that's still to come, creates a pretty unwieldy regulatory ecosystem. And what we also note is that the rules that are being developed for this industry are way more all-encompassing than the rules, for instance, for oil and gas, which we are actually seeking to displace. And so there is also sort of an intrinsic unfairness we find in these rules. And we have nothing against disclosure on supply chain. We are fully cooperative, and we are very tough on our suppliers, and extremely strict rules on environmental and also social factors. Don't get us wrong. But we would really like to see these applied across the supply chain, also for the fossil competition that we all are seeking to displace here. I hope that was more or less 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Dings. I gave you definitely with grace some extra minute, given that you were a bit later in the line of introductions. We do get some questions for all of the speakers, and I will try to moderate as best as we can the different elements. I would like to address a question to Mr. Kurz, and possibly a short response also with Mr. Dings. Is the question about first and second life and potential remanufacturing of the different batteries that come back at the end of their life. And we know that, of course, end of life in many applications can be many, many years. So it is a bit of a crystal ball, so to speak, on what second life might mean for some of this. So Mr. Kurz, would you like to give a short reaction to the view of the industry on second life?
So second life, first of all, can be a challenge to the concept of recycled content. And so we have to be assessed quite carefully whether what the impact of having batteries repurposed rather than having them recycled for the concept of recycled content means. It can be a little bit conflicting. Overall, it is a pretty good idea to take benefit from a product in another application. It has some obviously positive aspects, but we have to clearly allocate the responsibility for this new product. All the end-of-life responsibility goes over to the second-life producer. All the design requirements that apply to the first-life producer has to be properly transferred. And as we discussed with commissions, there are obviously some shortcomings in the current wording of the proposal.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dings, and then I would like to get some views from the parliamentarians on that, particularly on recyclability, second life, and what the future might look like. Mr. Dings, would you like to say a few words on that topic of the second life?
I more or less fully agree with the previous speaker. We have nothing fundamentally against second life as long as the transfer of responsibilities is properly done, and there can be some improvements in that respect. But yes, the longer a battery stays alive, which is something we all want, the less recycled material you have, and then we have the recycled content obligations, and we might have to resort to importing recycled materials from other parts of the world. So this is the reason that we don't like this provision very much, because it conflicts with the general desire to keep batteries alive for longer.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Dings. Mm-hmm. I would move to Ms. Spyraki and then to Ms. Gamon on this question, as well as a question on administrative burden that I will come back to in a few minutes. So Ms. Spyraki on this topic, and then Ms. Gamon.
Well, as you can understand, we are now here to listen and to adapt the concerns of the industry. And that's why I was wondering if the previous speaker could answer to my question about the maturity of the technology of second life. Because it is important for us to know the level of maturity of both the technology of second life and also the ability of extended producer responsibility schemes, especially for large batteries, for vehicles, in order to understand the possibility of the implementation of our legislative proposal.
Ms. Gamon?
I want to maybe talk very quickly about the point of why I think second life and recycling is such an important point also for how we see batteries in society and how we see them as part of the energy transition, especially second life, for example, of EV batteries, I think will be a very important step. And I wish not to be misinterpreted, but I think you know what I mean about normalizing the use of such huge batteries also in one's home. I think it's a very important step that will also lead to an increase in demand and to show how valuable batteries are also when it comes to integrating them in an energy system. And for that, we need a second life. Recyclability and second life was a very important point in our energy storage report. And of course, that's why I refer to using it in everybody's, in everyday people's houses. And it's just a normal part of how you integrate renewable energy sources in your home. And when it comes to regulatory burdens, I mean, that is always the goal, to not make it a burden, but to make it as such that it can be used in our market as a comparative advantage. And another final important point I think about recyclability and second life is that I see it also as a political, strategically important point for the European Union, so that we're less dependent on imports for raw materials for the production. As simple as that.
Thank you. I think for administrative burden, yes, indeed, we want to be cautious about that. Would any of the panelists, say a few words about the administrative burden? I think Mr. Dinks already made some remarks that if you're investing in new battery manufacturing in Europe, you want to have a certainty and also stability in the regulation itself. So while the idea of a regulation is excellent versus a directive, which then has to be implemented by member states, we also want it to be workable. Would any of the other panelists like to take the floor on that administrative aspect? Mr. Kurz?
I may be ready to make a short statement.
Go ahead.
So, when we talk administrative burden, every time it's industry raising that point, it's too much administrative burden for us. But what we see here in the battery regulation proposal, it's not the increasing administrative burden to the industry only, but it's also to the public administration. So when you look, just an example, when you look on recycled content, you have to identify recycled content for each battery type, for each manufacturing site, for each manufactured batch. This results in hundreds and hundreds of thousands declarations which have to be verified by public authorities to confirm compliance of the product. So we have to be very careful in the scoping of the requirements and how detailed this should look like to make it, to allow us to have it to handle it in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Kurz. Anyone else? If not, I would like to move to something.
If I may.
Yes, please. Ms. Spyraki.
Because it is important to collaborate at this level, and I think that we need the industry and we need the view of the industries in order to finally to achieve an implementable legislative framework. I insist on the use of new technologies, and I insist on common data space and data sharing in order to reduce administrative burdens and, of course, to reduce red tape. And in this regard, I think that the issue of the minimum contact could be tackled by exchanging data and by providing data to a common data space. I think the case is not how can we increase the administrative burdens, but how can we facilitate the industry and the market in order to go forward. And in this regard, I think that we have to understand that now we are working in a new era. We have to have products that they are innovative. We have to have products that they are reusable. We have to have products that they could be recyclable. And we have to understand that this is the new production, the innovative production on which the EU must be and could be the leader in the world. Thank you very much for having me, and excuse me for consuming much time.
No, that's all right. Maybe that's a good segue to then also Ms. Gamon, because actually I got a question in. Europe wants to be ahead of many things, and for good reasons, for sustainable for climate, for many reasons, and also Europe is a very fertile market when it comes to transitions and transformations to more use of renewable energy. At the same time, we don't want to have criteria for the manufacturing of batteries which then can be undercut by batteries being imported and not obliging to the same conditions and sustainability criteria. So Ms. Gamon, I would like to ask your view on that. And after that, we will go probably to the final round of statements by each of the panelists. Ms. Gamon? It's a complex question.
You know, this is a very interesting... Yeah, it's a very complex question, but sustainable batteries are not the only industry that has this problem. I mean, that also... I guess I don't think we could even make a list right now of how many industries are affected by that, because we also pride ourselves about our high standards and when it comes to environmental standards, labor standards, and so on in the European Union. That is something that is also very important to consumers here. It will be something interesting that we will have to resolve in different ways in the European Parliament and in the institutions this year, but I'm well aware of the fact.
Okay. I think one of the points that is probably quite important in the proposed regulation and also expressed by the Commission, that indeed imported batteries will need to prove that they are sustainable, so green batteries in short. And that will also lead indeed to some checking of the borders, checking by national administrations. So that's part of the way that will be discussed in the Parliament and with the Council, how much you balance that to make it not an administrative burden at the same time. Is there anyone else wanting to tune in on this? I don't think so. Then I would like to actually ask each of the industry panelists to make a final 1-minute round on what you believe, if you had a wish, could be an improvement of the current proposal by the Commission, and which you would like give as a closing message at this panel and at this webinar. I would like to start with Mr. Jos Dings. What would be your wish? And you have about 1 minute for that.
My wish would be that the elements that we really said we welcome in the proposal, that they would be maintained and further improved, and that we are quite watchful over the thousands and thousands of pages of regulations that are in the pipeline. There's over 30 delegations to the Commission to write new pieces of legislation, and at this point, if you invest in Europe, you have no idea what is coming, whether this is going to be legal, whether it's going to be a stranded asset or not. So simply the regulatory risk of investing in Europe is higher than in other continents. And, so are we really achieving our common objective here? That's a pretty important fundamental question that we should be asking ourselves.
Thank you. And indeed, as EUROBAT is, as I hear, following very closely the debates and the proposals, maybe I can give the floor to Mr. de Metz to give his 1-minute wish.
Thank you, Alphonse. What I said earlier, I think all the ingredients are in the proposed regulation to ensure the sustainable development of the battery industry over the next 20 plus years. So the framework is there, but I think we all have, whether it's industry, parliamentarians, member state representatives, to really look at each one of those angles with an open mind to ensure that they truly bring differentiation and benefits. So really put them through a sieve to ensure that they are truly proportionate between the constraints they create and the benefits they bring So this is all I'm wishing for over the next few months with the different institutions.
Thank you, Mr. de Metz. Mr. Kurz, your minute to maybe round up from the industry viewpoint.
No disagreement with my colleagues, and as we mentioned, or as already mentioned in the discussion, we should really define numeric targets or reassess them at least once methodologies are clear. This level of uncertainty makes it difficult to assess the proposal, and also the cross-reference of how does the substance management into reach. That would be a thing I wish. But I have two more generic wishes for the battery regulation. It should push innovation and boost existing industries. The Commission proposal is very complex in terms of administration, and I hope this is not an obstacle for innovation. As a European battery industry, the combination of old school and advanced technologies is really relying on battery regulation that allows all technologies to play their role. What we see today is a proposal that initially was designed to focus a little bit more on EV batteries, and so some fine regulate all electrochemical systems, in all applications is really needed. And at the end, it's the mission of EUROBAT to support the Council, Commission, and Parliament to achieve that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a fair point. EUROBAT, as the industry are here, is relatively happy that there is now this proposal coming forward, and we need to balance those interests. That leaves the floor to first Mrs. Spyraki to. It's early stage in the Parliament, and many more discussions and amendments may come, to give your wish already at this stage. Ms. Spyraki?
I think that we can work together. We can take on board all the concerns when it comes to industry, but I think that we can agree on the basics, on the principles that we now have the opportunity to create a more sustainable, circular, and very innovative market in terms of batteries.
Thank you, Ms. Spyraki. Ms. Gamon, your take.
This discussion has shown me once again that especially the legislators have to focus on not losing sight of the goal. And the goal is really giving room to the battery industry in Europe. It's giving room to battery innovation in Europe. We will need more capital. We need to reduce the regulatory burden. We really need to make space for battery innovation to make sure that it will happen in Europe and not anywhere else. And we sometimes it happens in legislation that we lose sight of the actual goal, but I think that needs to be underlined time and time again, that we want batteries from Europe that are such an integral part of the energy transition.
Thank you. I would like to give a virtual round of applause to the panel for making succinct points, very clear points on that. I wish to especially thank the two parliamentarians who stepped out of a plenary session of the European Parliament happening exactly at this week, and giving their view at this early stage of the development of the proposal into the Council and the European Parliament. And we look forward to working with you as well for a sustainable future for Europe, where battery manufacturing and also the use of batteries will help us for the future in the economy and in a sustainable planet on a world basis. I also thank the industry, Mr. Dings, Mr. Kurz and Mr. de Metz for their contribution, and would like to definitely keep in touch with all of you in the audience. Not the beginning, but actually a good beginning of the whole discussion that will happen with you as an audience and with others on the floor. I would like to give the floor back to our key moderator, Mr. Gert Meilemans. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alphonse, and of course also many thanks to the expert panel that we had today and the great discussion. And now I would like to hand over back to Dr. Zoellner, actually, who will deliver the summary and some concluding remarks. Mr. Zoellner, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. I hope ladies and gentlemen, this was good invested time, as it surely was for me. I think it started with an enlightening market outlook at the beginning. All battery technologies will be there and important in 2030. Certainly, electromobility drives this enormous growth for lithium technology, but also lead technology will grow slightly, mostly due to UPS and telecom application. I think that European battery production should be able to cover the demand locally in Europe. That's what we heard, and that's a wish, but this can only be achieved with sufficient investment in R&D and production. I'm happy that we learned that with Maria Spyraki and Claudia Gamon, we have two important rapporteurs also today with us, and they are into that topic, the role of batteries in energy transition and in the landscape of the Green Deal. That all seems to be clear. It is important to get funding in Europe, and I think we also agree we have to be more independent, and it's not only on the Commission but also European Parliament now. So we are looking forward to working together, also with those two rapporteurs. The industry is supportive of the battery regulation. Of course, there are fields that we have to work on. No double regulation was one of the main ones that I heard, and also the question of the methodology that has to be solid and clear before concrete targets are going to be set for the industry. Yes, there is a technical question, and yes, experts have to support, but I think politics, Commission, Parliament, Council have to be prudent and patient to set the right methodology first. What we have to avoid, that was another good one, I think, is the intrinsic unfairness compared to other industries, given the fact that there is now a huge regulation coming to an industry, and competing industries aren't at all regulated like that, so that has to be avoided, and the battery regulation has to be as easy and also as fair, so there is a bright future. I have sensed that the two parliamentarians, the two rapporteurs, are open to take on our concerns, and I think it's going to be up to us to cooperate now in the coming weeks and months. The overall goal for all of us has to be to create a sustainable, independent and competitive European battery industry, and we can use the battery regulation for that. We as EUROBAT will keep following, of course, with great interest the debate with the Council and European Parliament. Thank you again for the participation, especially our speakers and all the contributors. Thanks a lot, and we keep you posted. Back to you, Gerd.
Thank you, Dr. Zoellner, for that summary and those concluding remarks. And also, of course, thank you from my side as well, both to the speakers, but also to you, the participants. We are now reaching actually the end of our program. I do hope that you all found it very interesting. And the ones that could not join today or could only partially join, we will indeed put the recorded session on our website somewhere mid next week. So stay tuned for that. So before we go and before we close, kindly do us a favor and rate today's event by literally clicking 4 times on a screen that will pop up once we close the browser session. And it's great if we could get your feedback also after today's session. That's it from my side. Thank you again. Hope to see you at a future occasion, be it virtually or in real life. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.